Okay, we should be ready to go here. David Kirsten with PA 623 for week number 5. Screencast here. It's just after noon. Um, so first, I wanted to say about the midterm. Sorry, we're going to talk about just what the midterm is, how to upload it, and some tips for the midterm. So I want to put that at the very beginning. Then next thing, I want to talk about a grade update. I know some folks are wondering how they're doing in the course. So I'm going to try to clear that up and or get it cleared up very soon, and we can always follow up on that and keep in touch. Number 3, I want to look ahead to Module 5 just briefly. Number 4, a couple additional thoughts about just the history of economic thought as it pertains to your Module 5 discussion. I just had some notes on those key schools that are mentioned there. So, this will almost help you with the discussions. So I thought it'd be an update you can use. 5, wanted to talk about public debt, CAFRs, well, how to research them, and the CAFRs are where you find the public debt for state and local agencies. The last item is the U.S. financial crisis of 2008. So I've done a lot of research on this. I've given a few lectures on it. Some of these lectures run, 4 hours. So I wanted to provide you with that lecture and just kind of hit a few of the highlights, give you some additional sources of information, just my thoughts kind of in a nutshell on the financial crisis of '08. So trying to keep the total time today to about 30, 40 minutes. And, I'll take your questions after that. And you can always give me a call on my cell phone too. If I jump out and something comes up, it's 916-698-2805. You can text me if I don't pick up, and I can get back to you this afternoon. I'm just going to be kind of in and out in the mid to later afternoon, but I can get back to you. Email's great. Folks reach me over email, so email is the quickest response usually. But I will be on my phone today if you need me to, and you don't have time to jump into the meeting here. So the midterm item number 1 here, we had, when I went through this course initially, the midterm loaded fine, but then when they transferred it over to it being live, for whatever reason, it reverted to this quiz for the midterm, which is, not the right type of midterm for this course. We're not kind of quizzing you on, multiple choice on what is kind of supply side, thinking, or, I think essay makes a lot more sense here. So, all the discussions, all the questions are for the test or essay. So, really the midterm here, and remember, this is not due until the 25th next week, a week from tomorrow at 11:59. Wanted to give you more time due to the uncertainty initially, and also I just feel like I could allow you more time here, so that kind of made sense from my perspective. I know nobody's going to complain about more time typically, but this is the midterm. 3 of the following 7 questions. If you only answer 2 of the 7, you're going to see an 83-point deduction. Sometimes I'll give you a chance to make all or part of that up if it was an oversight. There was kind of these numbers on 5, 6, and 7 weren't here, so but on the earlier version, but that's been corrected. Let me know if you have any other questions or ambiguity about any of these questions. I think it's pretty straightforward. Most people tend to do the write your own question. We'll see what people choose. If you do a harder question, but you do a bad job on it, I don't kind of give extra points for the degree of difficulty. So try to do kind of the question that you're going to do a good job on. If you don't know what it is, you're welcome to research it either through the course materials or even online. So you are welcome to use sources outside the course. So to submit this, well, if I were doing the exam, I just recommend printing this out and then, circling the questions you're going to do and then type it up in a Word document or what's the Apple Pages or whatever word processor you want to use. And then you click to the next and then you turn in midterm assignment here. So it should have a way for you to upload the midterm from this page. Mine's the kind of course administrator, but I was told that from this page, after you click next, you can upload. So if you have any issues, let me know. You can always email it to me if you're kind of up against a deadline. I'd like to get every exam uploaded there so we have a record of it. If there is an issue, I can work with the department to get the file uploaded. So it's a major exam in that it's 250 points, which is, I believe, was it 20% of your grade or something? If I look at the syllabus here, if you look at the syllabus, those 100-point assignments were fairly big. Here's the point value. 250 is a little bit between 20 and 25% of your grades. So for both the midterm and finals. So you want to, put in the time. It says generally people write 2 to 3 pages. I would agree with that. If you write less than 2, you might have trouble touching all the points. I do see answers where sometimes people write it fairly brief, but they're really succinct and they cover everything, and I don't make any deductions. But it's better to err on the side of more rather than less. The most common reason for deductions is not responding to all parts of the question and leaving things out that were asked. Maybe one part, the answer to everything right, but you get to the last part and you just put one sentence and then you're done. And so you're going to see probably a 10, 15, maybe even a 20-point deduction for leaving that last piece unaddressed. So anyway, I do, grade these more closely than the discussions and some of the other things. So just keep that in mind. Okay, moving on, grade update. I did, a couple people checked in with me about how they're doing in the course. I am working on getting the second 100-point assignment done. My goal here is to really, by the time all these midterms are turned in next week, to almost be completely caught up on the grading up until the midterm. And then when the midterms are due, within a week, or ideally by that weekend, get all the midterms graded. So I can you can check your grade update through the course, or you can email me at that time. Once the midterm has been submitted, within 5 days after that, if you want a grade update, or if you can't find it in there. So I'm happy to kind of give you a grade update about how you're doing in the course based on all the work that has been submitted and graded. And again, trying to get almost all of it done, by essentially 2 weeks from now, 1 to 2 weeks from now. So that'll give you a good update going into the last 2 or 3 modules plus the final of where you are. So if you're on the borderline, you want to pull your grade up, you'll kind of know what's doable. Okay, I'll leave the grades there for now. We'll revisit that in probably 2 weeks, or we can be in touch over email too if you have a question in the interim. Look ahead at module number 5. This asks for provide some readings on the debt in taxes. We're going to talk a little bit more about taxes in a future screencast. I did want to hit the debt issue today. That's one of our future items. I've done, debt and taxes and, fiscal policy are my specialties, so I have a fair number of things to say there. History of economic thought and paragrams. Paradigm. I can't pronounce that. Is that even spelled right? I never see it in the plural here. Paradigm. In your discussion post this week, debate proposed solutions to the financing of government debt, contrasting Keynesian monetarist and supply-side approaches to public finance. So these are probably the three most prominent schools of economic thought in the past, in recent history. We're actually going to just talk about this goes right into our item on history of economic thought number 4. So I might say a couple words the rest of the modules, but my intent was to address these three schools. So Keynesian economics really took over the economics world starting in the 30s with the publishing of John Maynard Keynes's general theory, which really said, well, it should be the government's role to secure full employment through fiscal policy, through policies designed to improve, increase employment. And there was kind of a lapse in in the post-war era. You have the Great Depression, which it was during the 30s. So what you had was the government taking on an increasing role around the world, not only the U.S. government, other governments. So you had this real resurgence of the welfare state, and really the advent of it, of what we have is kind of a post-war consensus towards a strong safety net, programs for the poor, health insurance for the poor, public housing. None of that stuff existed prior to the 30s. So when we fought the war, but then after the war there was a consensus that all these programs made sense, which started during the Great Depression and continued on up until the 70s when an economic malaise set in. And that's when supply-side approach really took root. And, supply-side economics, in my opinion, is more of a kind of a buzzword than an actual, it is a school, but I don't think it's holds together as well, because it doesn't talk about all economics. It's almost like a political gimmick in that, you can cut taxes and actually increase revenue, and that's the kind of belief. And if it doesn't sound like it, if it sounds like it's fantasy, that's because it probably is. But during certain periods, John F. Kennedy had success actually cutting tax rates down from, they were 70% down towards I think 45 or even 40%, and he actually saw an increase in revenue. So if there's a guy named Arthur Laffer, who you may have heard, the Laffer curve goes like this, that says if you actually cut revenue, you can actually, if you cut taxes, you can actually increase revenue because you'll see a surge in economic activity. So that's the theory. I'd say in certain periods, which are fairly rare, you've actually made a tax cut, and for whatever reason, it might not even be due to the tax cut, but economic circumstances, you have seen an increase in revenue. Certainly, that hasn't played out with these most recent round of Trump tax cuts, we've actually seen big increases in the deficit. So, we've seen every Republican, George W., Reagan, have a big contingent of these supply siders that say, okay, we need to bring taxes down. You're going to raise more revenue. That sounds great to get it passed, but it actually doesn't usually happen that way. If you go and track back, do all the data for what actually happened, I would say it's very rare that that actually happens. And over the long term, I just don't see it as a viable school. So the monetarist school, I would say that school got stronger in the 70s and the 80s, and there was folks in Europe. There's Milton Friedman in the US, who was the most famous monetarist, and that's really about using monetary policy to manage the economy, whereas Keynesian is using fiscal policy, which includes monetary policy, but more government spending. So the monetary school is really keeping a low inflation rate. Friedman actually argued that you only want inflation of about 1.5% or so. That's the target now. I forget exactly what he said. He kind of had a formula that, okay, looking over the long term, you only want inflation to go up by this much, whereas on the natural, it's going to go up by that much. So you do that by restricting the money supply. And, he wrote a book really looking at the whole history of U.S. monetary policy going back to the 1800s and, proving this case. There's a number of other monetarists at the Chicago School, a guy in Europe, I forget his name, several folks in Europe and France. So, really that's the advent of monetary policy. Now, we still have folks who believe in, all three of these schools. It's still really the kind of model of looking at the economy that we haven't really advanced past. These roots are still with us in our political system. So that's why I wanted to kind of give my 2 cents on those. Public debt. This is our 5th issue. I know some folks have made a couple comments on public debt, and this is kind of one of my specialties, something that I've actually been concerned about in both in California and outside California. There's a great Times piece that I should send around. Time magazine did a piece on the debt. This is like a couple years ago. It had a good graphic about where the debt is. I'll send that around. Let's just look at U.S. public debt. How to research this stuff. I usually, if I was going to have to write a paper on the U.S. public debt or California debt, I'll usually just Google it, and then you'll get a number of relevant reports. U.S. public debt. Let's just see what comes up for U.S. public debt. So U.S. debt hit $22 trillion February 13th here, article. Here, I saw a good chart there in the beginning, but it didn't carry over here. Let's see. It's on Wikipedia. This actually looks very similar to the Times chart. So you see how we have a spike in the public debt here. I mean, it's gradually increasing throughout the 80s with, the supply side tax cuts. Bill Clinton was actually the best on the debt in recent history. A lot of that was due to his, management of the economy, which was the results were impressive. Then you have a increase in the debt for Obama. If you actually look at that, some people blame Obamacare. I actually think Obamacare is a fairly small piece of that and what the value you get for Obamacare. So, a lot of it was just the sluggish economic growth and the huge draw on social programs, running deficits there. But if we continued this, the debt's continuing to go up under Trump, probably even higher than under Obama. So, and Trump, of course, said something different when he was running for office, but now a little bit different. Now he says, who cares about the debt, because it's just easier for politicians to ignore it. So it keeps going up. So, most economists say that really you look at debt as the share of the economy. So debt can increase, but as long as the economy is increasing by the same or greater rate, then it doesn't really pose more of an issue. So, that I always kind of compare, debt to the size of the economy, debt to the size of the local budget, which we're going to look at. I don't want to try to dig up the figures for, okay, here's as of June 2019, federal debt held by the public was 16.17 trillion, and intragovernmental holdings was almost 6 trillion, for a total national debt of 22 trillion. At the end of 2018, debt held by the public was 76% of GDP. So, and approximately 39% of the debt was held by foreigners. So the U.S. debt to GDP ratio ranked 43rd out of 207 countries. The Congressional Budget Office forecast in April 2018 that debt held by the public will rise to nearly 100% of GDP by 2028, perhaps even higher if current policies are extended beyond their expiration date. So, that's a concern, going up not only in total dollar terms, but also as a percentage of GDP. Okay, that's the federal debt. Now, researching the state of California debt, the best place for that is to actually go to the state of California CAFR report. So here's the controller puts out the consolidated annual financial report, which we've actually taken a brief look at before. Here's net position. So this is like the total net worth of the state of California. You have, so this is the 2018, this is the 2017 report. Let me try to get the 2018, if I can find it here. The new one here. These are published in December, and they go through the most recent fiscal year. So in 2019, it's going to go through fiscal year 2018. So when did this one come out? Sometimes it's a little bit different here. So they run about a half a year behind. They usually come out in the fall. This one may have actually just came out. The state one comes out quicker sometimes. Okay, so 2018 total revenues for the state of California. This includes governmental and business type activities. Those are the two major divisions. $315 billion. Total expenses, $300 billion. That's a surplus of $14.5 billion. So the net position, though, if you actually look at the total net worth of the state, is actually negative by $70 billion. And the reason is you have these debt categories, which we're going to look at a better chart because it's not kind of broken out here. It just has, this is on an annual basis. You know, you're bringing in 315 billion, you're spending 300, but if you look at your debt is really over multiple years. What's the total amount you owe? Every year you make an annual payment. So it's kind of like the difference between your mortgage and your annual payments on that mortgage. So the net position actually went from 21 billion a negative to 70 billion. That's because of the state's health care for retired employees actually came onto the books. That was actually held off the books before this year. So let me show you a better summary of what that debt is. Now each of those lines in that overall chart's broken out in its own chart, which goes further down. Here's long-term obligations. So this is most of the debt, $314 billion. Okay, so yeah, pardon me. This I just want to go back and clarify something that there's another chart later on that actually takes a snapshot at 1 year. This is actually your total assets. What's the total value of everything owned by the state of California? What is that total? That includes and then what the total what they owe is their liabilities. So that's the long-term debt. So that's why they're minus 70 billion in the hole. I'll show you what that is on an annual basis. I know this is kind of confusing the first time around, just bear with me. Okay, so this is a good summary chart about somebody asks you what's the long-term debt for the state of California. It's actually $314 billion. So, you know, that's the kind of debt hanging over us. That's the equivalent of that 22 trillion at the federal level. The state equivalent of that is 314 billion. So you see 76 billion of that is general obligation bonds, 28 is revenue bonds. Total bonded debt, $105 billion. Net pension liability, $98 billion. The OPEB, which is the retiree health care, is the $89 billion. And that actually depends on that amount. There's a couple different ways to calculate that, which are described further on. Here's some smaller debt categories. So total 314 billion for debt. I'll show you one more chart here that is kind of the annual snapshot. Here's another balance sheet for the general fund. Okay, so this is the general fund in a given year, how much you're raising in taxes, how much you're spending, and that difference is raising 135 billion, spending 124. So this is really your discretionary revenues and spending. $11 billion surplus for the 2018 fiscal year. So You always want that number to be positive because that means you're banking money. Given that we have a $315 billion long-term debt, if this is positive, then you can pay that off over time. Of course, you're making payments on that debt as part of these expenditures, but if you can also put this money away in a form of a bank account or investing in assets in that assets column, then that's decreasing your total deficit, your total debt, which is the the net worth, so to speak. Okay, well, this might be a little bit too, I don't like to say a whole lot here. I like to just kind of guide you through some of the key documents, and then really just take some time to pick the agency that you're interested in or that you want to look at, and just spend some time just trying to decipher what this stuff means. I remember the early times, me looking at these documents, you're kind of unsure about yourself, but what does this number really mean? But as long as you quote this document directly and say what it says, that's a great way to do a financial analysis, because then if you're wrong, you're only wrong about your interpretation. You're actually sourcing where that number came from, so you're not making it up out of thin air. There might be some number that's off the books that, how could you possibly know about that retiree health care liability before this report if it was off the books? There's a lot more detail in here for some of those numbers, but I'll leave the public debt there for now. And again, there is a capital report for every public agency in the U.S. and special district. So all the states have them, all the local governments have them. Sometimes they're either late to come out, but they do have to be done in a certain way, and they do have are the best source of debt figures. Let me just show you one more if I can find it real quick. There's a 10-year snapshot, which I think is actually the most useful to look at debt over the previous 10 years, where it's been, where it's going. This is pretty long. Let's see if I can find it fairly quickly. Otherwise, we can always look at that. Okay, so all the retirement plans, there's more detail on all the retirement plans, what the return is, what their total liabilities are. I know the 10 years almost at the back, but okay, here's debt over the 10 years, where that's when I want to find total income. There's revenue base over 10 years. So here's the governmental funds over 10 years. So in 2009, you were bringing in 174 billion in revenues, spending 195, a $21 billion deficit. And that's why we had some huge issues with, deficits then. They had to sell revenue bonds, borrow a bunch of money. So I like to kind of map this out on an Excel spreadsheet so I can kind of look at the numbers and run some, just simple statistics on them about, okay, what's the annual increase in revenues? What's the annual increase in expenditures? What's this debt figure doing here? Total excess of revenues over expenditures. So you have, basically deficit spending here after the peak or the trough, the bust after 2008. And then you gradually actually climb out of that. You have some slight surpluses here. slight deficit in 2017, but very modest surpluses here in 2018. Again, these are the final audited numbers, which are a lot more accurate than projections. When you pass a budget, you have projections. These are actual final numbers. Here's the debt load, stays at about 5% of debt service as a percentage of non-capital expenditures. And it was a little lower here in 10, 11, and it went up here towards 5%. Now it's started to dip back a little bit. So I know the LAO says usually you don't want that over 5%. Okay, that's enough for the cappers for today. Let me just take a quick look at this document. So this is a 66-page presentation I did on the U.S. financial crisis and what caused it, what it means, what lessons can we take from it. If you do have an interest in this, you can take a look at this. Let me know if you have any questions. There's a great quick book on this called After the Music Stopped, The Financial Crisis, The Response, and Work Ahead. I could quote a number of key books here. But essentially it was caused by the housing crisis, and you had this kind of manipulation of loan guarantees and what these loans were actually worth. So you had there's stories of people making minimum wage but qualifying for $300,000 or $400,000 house. So sorry, let me get rid of this. What a nightmare. I'm sorry about that. Okay, so essentially you had the subprime mortgage crisis is what caused it, where these houses, home prices got so inflated, but they weren't actually backed up by the value of the house. And when the market crashed, you had loans for more than the house was worth, and then you had a huge contraction in the economy. And there's a lot of different ins and outs, but that's essentially what caused it. I'll let people take a quick look at this. We're at 12:40 now, so I didn't want to go too long. But let me know if you do have an interest in the '08 recession. I could come back to this on a fresh day and hit a few more of these points. It's kind of tough to run through such a substantive presentation in a couple minutes. Just wanted to introduce what this was. So anyway, it looks like the sharing was paused here. Let's see. Okay. Okay. Oh, here was a question about, is it 3 pages total or 3 pages for each question? I'd say 2 to 3 pages for each question on the midterm exam. But again, note my comments about if you are really succinct, sometimes a page and a half can do it depending on the question. If you go less than a page, double spaced, I don't know that I'll be able to give full credit as far as developing the ideas for an 83-point question in a substantive enough manner. Okay, so with that, I'm going to stop the recording here, and I'll open it up to questions.